True Sound Studios is in your ears.
Hey guys, welcome back to True Sound Studios. I'm Weezna, and today we get into part 2 of the DAW mixing console routing. So real quick before we get into this video, go ahead and check the description box down below for all my mixing and mastering rates if you guys do want to work on a project together, as well as some other information that I mentioned in this video. What we're going to be doing is we're going to send individual channels from the DAW to the mixing console. So to try not to complicate this too much, we're just going to work on 2 channels, okay? We're going to send the kick drum from the DAW to the mixing console on its own fader, and then we're also going to patch in a DBX compressor to it. And then we're going to do the same thing with a snare drum, so you have kick and snare come out on your mixing console, 2 different faders, 2 different pieces of outboard gear, and then we'll blend it back into the track. So just a refresher, 1 through 8 and 9 through 16, these are my primary mixing channels. I do have 4 more stereo channels, these ones, that I might use, but lately I haven't been doing that. Over here, this is all effects, and then this is really another 8 channels that I use for recording. So I kind of showed you guys all this stuff in the previous video. Today we're going to be focusing on here. With that being said, you have to have an interface that is going to allow you to have enough inputs and outputs to actually be able to use with your DAW. My interfaces that I use are these. These are SSL Alpha Link converters, okay? This group, these 3 units right here, make up my interface. And allows me, these 2 units here allow me 20 inputs and 20 outputs. So in the back here, you can see all of those analog outputs from the converters are running into the line inputs on the mixing console. So I have 16 line outputs coming from the SSL converters into 16 line inputs on the mixing console. So if we come up on the mixing console, you can see all the buttons are pressed in, and that just means that we are not in mic mode, we are in line input mode. So all 16 of these channels are all in line input. Okay, so let's set up our first channel. We're gonna come right to here. We're gonna do kick drum. And then after that, we're gonna go snare. So this is gonna be kick and snare. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is jump over to the DAW. I'm using Cakewalk Sonar Platinum. And I'm gonna show you guys where you can route these individual outputs. And what I'm gonna do is we're gonna go to our kick drum channel. So if I solo the kick drum, you're going to see that you can see the kick drum, is making noise. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here. At the very bottom, it says output. Now, right now I have it set to a drum bus inside of my DAW. But what I can do is I can click on this, and I get this big list. So this is actually all the DAW buses. But in this case, we don't care about routing to that. Up here, this is the list of all my actual analog outputs coming from my interface. So if we come down here, I already have these pre-labeled. I'm going to go to left, kick and snare. So how at least Cakewalk sets it up is there's always stereo channels, but to make them mono, it's like left, which is the kick one, right would be snare, or you could select them both and you get a stereo channel, but we don't want that. So I'm going to pick left, kick, and snare. So I'm going to click on that, and now you can see the level actually has changed too. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this fader down till we get somewhere, maybe somewhere right around there. That should be pretty good. Just a little bit of in the red there, but that's okay. I'll reset this. You can see it's at -5. So now let's go over to the analog mixing console, and you'll see the audio coming up. Okay, so now if we come over to that first channel, you can see we're getting signal into the mixing console. If I turn this up, there is the kick drum coming out of the speakers now. So let me go ahead and just stop this real quick, and now we'll go ahead and route the snare drum. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and click on, and in this particular song, I have 2 different snare drum sounds. We're just going to group them both together. It's a good situation because, sometimes you have multiple microphones. You want to route to one channel on the mixing console. So once again, we're going to come down here to the output. And this time, instead of the left kick and snare, we're going to do right. And once again, all that means is just the left is actually the kick and the right is actually the snare. So we're going to click right, and we're going to come down to this second snare drum channel and do the exact same thing. We're going to do right, kick, and snare. Now that's just how I labeled them. You can call them whatever you want. Now if I go ahead and play this, now we have both of our snare drum sounds going through one channel. So now let's jump back over to the mixing console. Okay, so now we come back over here, and now on channel 2, you can see now we have snare drum coming up. Oh yeah. So now if I solo both the kick and snare, now we got kick drum coming up on one, snare drum on the other. So you can mute it, kick only, flip-flop them, snare only, both of them together. You can adjust your faders, you can adjust, you can mix, you could add EQ and, do all sorts of stuff here. Okay, so now we have kick and snare coming up. Now what if we wanted to add compression on just the kick and a separate compressor just on the snare? So what I have is down here is my patch bay, and patched into all 16 channels for the mixing, I can patch in any one of my pieces of rack gear or any of those or any of that stuff. So in particular, I have the kick drum through a send and return comes over to a set of DBX compressors. So the top one is for the kick drum and the bottom one is for the snare. Now right now they're both bypassed, but we can unbypass these. And now if I go ahead and turn these faders back up, I can actually start adjusting the compression. So let's just start with a kick. So let's see here, we'll add a little. You can really, squash it if you wanted to for whatever reason. Just adding a little, looks like 6 to 1. You can adjust the output and do a little makeup gain. You can see right now we're getting about 3 dB of reduction. If we come back over here now, we can pull up the snare. We'll just do snare drum. So now we have the snare drum down here. We can add So I like that. So now we can come back and turn up our kick drum. And now we've routed our kick and snare from the DAW to the mixing console. Okay, so now we got the kick and snare coming out of the DAW into the mixing console. We added some compression. Now we can adjust levels or make some EQ changes on the mixing console and blend it and get it to be, exactly the way we want. From there, I can go ahead and blend all the rest of the elements of the entire song. So the bass, the synth, the guitar, the vocals, and I can use my remaining 14 channels to put all those different elements onto there. And just like you guys saw, like the kick drum was just one kick drum channel. It went from one kick drum channel on the DAW to one channel on the mixing console. But with the snare, I took 2 channels from the DAW. I selected the same output so that both of those DAW snare channels get combined together and come out as just one channel on the mixing console. So if I wanted to add the synth, the bass, all that extra stuff, I would use totally separate outputs. So no longer would I be using, the left kick/snare channel and the right kick/snare channel. I'd use some of my other ones. I have left drums, right drums, which I typically use for like toms and overheads and rooms. Then I have like a hi-hat, I have a bass channel, I have a guitar/synth channel, which those are actually in stereo. A stereo channel for leads, whether it be guitar leads or synth leads. I have a vocal main channel. I have a vocal Dolby channel, like a Dolby noise reduction unit that you turn into a vocal stressor, which is another piece of modded gear. And then I have a stereo channel for all my backup vocals or vocal effects. And then finally, I have a stereo channel for all of my like reverbs and delays and choruses. And just once again, those are all separate outputs. So no longer will I be using like the kick and snare channel. Now I'm using different outputs. And just to get back to the beginning where I showed you guys the interface, the amount of inputs and outputs changes how many channels you can have on your mixing console. So for example, I have 20 outputs right now. My 20 outputs, I'm using 16 of them on the first 16 channels, and then 17 and 18 are a master fader channel, which I use if I'm not going to be doing this type of mixing. And then the last 19 and 20 is my mastering channel when I'm having really, really high levels of audio coming out of the DAW. So really, without using those two faders, which are stereo, which actually take 4 total channels up, I only have 16 channels. And that's the reason why I'm only using 16 of them to do the mixing. Okay, so now let's say you got everything on the mixing console, right? You've blended it, it sounds amazing, but now what? Like, how do we then record that perfect mix? So how this is routed is all 16 of my mixing channels are then gonna come over to a group. And on my Allen & Heath, it's group 1 and 2. Now on the back of the mixing console, there's 2 XLR outputs. There's an XLR output for group 1, there's an XLR output for group 2. So then what I'm doing is connecting 2 inputs from my interface to group 1 and group 2 so that I can send a stereo channel to the DAW, and I'm recording the entire mix as a stereo file in the DAW. Okay, so what I've done is I've routed the rest of this small project. There's only a couple synths and then the drums. I routed all those channels though to the mixing console. So I only showed you guys kick and snare, but then I routed using that stereo drums out. I routed the toms, the overheads, and the rooms all to that additional stereo pair. So you have kick, snare, that additional drum stereo pair, and then I used 2 more for the synth. That's it. This is a really simple song, but this is at least what it looks like on the mixing console. So from here you can mix and blend and make your mix perfect on the mixing console. And now we can jump back over to the DAW because now we need to take this mix coming from the mixing console and record it back into the DAW on a track that I like to call a summed audio track or a summed mix track. So let's jump over to the DAW. Let me show you guys how I'm doing that. Okay, so now I've created a track and I like to call it summed or summed audio, because that's really what it is. It's, it's all the DAW tracks going to the mixing console, going through whatever gear, coming out of group 1 and 2, and now it's going to be re-recorded back into the DAW. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to start my song right here, wherever it starts. You can start it at 0 if you want, but just for this video's sake. And I'm just going to hit record, and it's going to start recording the entire track. So you can see up there, the whole song is now being re-recorded back into the DAW, because realistically, we have to have some way to be able to, to use this mix. I mean, we could record it back onto a tape machine if we wanted. For me, I find this works out the best. So I'm just going to let it run the whole thing, and just make sure you don't touch anything, you don't turn things on and off while this is happening, because it can affect the actual sound of the recording. Any clicks and pops of your mixing console will be recorded back into here. Okay, so now it has been recorded. So you can see in this part here with the toms, and now I need to solo this because I cannot have the rest of the track playing, otherwise you're gonna get this weird phasey sound. So I'm gonna solo it. You can hear it clipped. But that's the whole song. So, you know, this is stuff that you do have to watch out, which just means I was hitting the group section a little too hard and actually clipped the converters on the way in. So it's, you know, something you can just very simply go ahead and delete it and go back and redo it. I'm not going to do that right now. So I know this is complicated. It's a very intricate setup. You know, there's patch bays and analog gear and a mixing console, and you're sending it to and from the DAW. I mean, it is a very in-depth setup. And it took me a long time to be able to get to this point where I can do all this routing and bring it back and forth. Probably the best thing to understand is signal flow, how it actually goes from one thing to the next, and levels and gain staging. That's the type of stuff that when you can wrap your head around that, then when it gets to hooking all this type of stuff up, it's really not that difficult. In fact, for me, I think it's easier to route and plug in all this stuff in an actual analog mixing console than do some of the stuff in the DAW, because there isn't a physical connection or a wire that I can see, and, you know, for my brain it makes sense. In the DAW, it's all done digitally, and there isn't any visual, and actually took me probably even longer to learn how the DAW all interconnects than it did for me to learn the analog side of it. So that really leads me to the next video. Let's say you don't have an analog mixing console and you don't really care to ever have one, but maybe you like analog gear and you like plugins, but maybe there's some choice pieces of analog gear that you want to integrate into your setup. In the next video, I'm going to show you guys how to use analog gear as kind of like a plugin and be able to put it anywhere in any chain, anywhere in your DAW. And I guess really you're kind of using it as an analog piece of gear that's acting kind of like a plugin. So look out for that video. That is coming up soon. All right, guys, so thanks a lot for watching. I know this stuff is super complicated. I'm going to be doing like a more simplified version of this in the future. Not right now. I got a whole bunch of other stuff going on. But if you guys do have comments, go ahead and leave them down below. Also, please go ahead and find True Sound Studios on Instagram. It is a great way to see what I'm doing every single day. And it's also really another great way to go ahead and reach out if you guys have some very specific questions. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So thank you for watching this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, click that like button and consider subscribing for more content. So not only do I make YouTube videos, but I also produce tracks and I can mix and master your music. So once again, thank you for watching this video. I'm Weezna, and True Sound Studios is in your ears.